Turn to the back of your bulletin. We have the Heidelberg Catechism question for Lord's Day number 32. And again, as our process here, I will read the questions and then together we'll respond with the answer. Question number 86. Since then we are redeemed from our misery by grace through Christ, without any merit of ours, why must we do good works? Because Christ, having redeemed us by his blood, also renews us by his Holy Spirit after his own image, that with our whole life we show ourselves thankful to God for his blessings, and that he be glorified through us, then also that we ourselves may be assured of our faith by the fruit thereof, and by our godly walk win also others to Christ. 87. Can they then not be saved who do not turn to God from their unthankfulness or unthankful, unrepentant life? Where Scripture says, no change, idolater, adulterer, thief, covetous man, drunkard, slanderer, robber, bloodlet, shall inherit the kingdom of God. So this question here, and this Lord's Day, begins the third part of the Heidelberg. The first part is basically, you have actually two questions before they begin the parts. But the first two are summary questions, really, of the whole Heidelberg. And then you have the first part, official part, which is man's misery, which would be questions 3 to 11. And then that is followed by man's redemption, which is questions 12 to 85. The man's misery is, again, addressing primarily just that. What is our state? And then questions, the 12 through 85 is talking about the doctrine of redemption and the doctrine of justification and faith and what's necessary for faith. And then it concludes with a discussion on the Trinity and the place of each member of the Trinity, and then the sacraments. And so this new section here begins a section about thankfulness. And it is going to carry us through the rest of the Heidelberg. And it is, again, addressing the issue of how is it that we as believers, understanding the salvation that was already been described, how is it that we are to live? And the overall application of the Heidelberg is to understand how the law of God now works in our lives, how it's applied to our lives, and particularly to prayer, and how prayer works as we grow in grace. And so our first question, question 86, is asking that question, that since we are redeemed from our misery by grace through Christ, without any merit of ours, why must we do good works? And several passages that I'm going to read through that also address question 87, which is, can they then not be saved who do not turn to God from their unthankful and unrepentant life? So the first is Romans 6 and verses 12 through 13. That says, therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in its lust, and do not present your members as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourselves to God as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. Romans 12, verses 1 through 2 says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. 1 Corinthians 6 and 23, you were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5, you also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And then in the same chapter, verses 9 and 10, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which once were not a people, but are now a people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. And then in the same chapter, verse 12, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. And then it also makes reference to Galatians 5, and I won't read all of that, but regarding the fruits of the Spirit, and how that the fruits of the Spirit are obviously something that comes from the Spirit, and they work in us, and including love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, and faithfulness. And as I considered again the question 86, since then we are redeemed from our misery by grace through Christ without any merit of ours, why must we do good works? We already have it all. We've been given it all by God. And I tried to craft some really fine language here, and I found the Heidelberg to be far better than what I could craft. And it's simply, I mean, this is one of the beauties of the Heidelberg, is how simply it does talk to these issues. The question, should we do good works? And the answer is because Christ, having redeemed us, doesn't leave us as a people that are unsaved. Okay? Because Christ, having redeemed us by his blood, he also renews us by his Holy Spirit after his own image. That's the Heidelberg. But my thought was the negative of that. God does not leave us alone. He doesn't leave us alone. He continues to work. He doesn't just save us and put us on a shelf. And then it goes on. It says that with our whole life we show ourselves thankful to God for his blessings. And again, that's the theme that we're going to be in over till the January 1st, when we come to the end of the Heidelberg cycle. That with our whole life we show ourselves thankful to God for his blessings, and that he be glorified through us. Then also that we ourselves may be assured of our faith by the fruits thereof, and by our godly walk win also others to Christ. So the people talk about evangelism all the time, and what kind of script needs to be read, and what kind of questions need to be asked. But here it is pretty simple. It's living a life that is thankful to God. There is no greater witness that we have to the people around us than that we are thankful to God for everything, for our misery, for our needs, for our depression, for our happy times, for our accomplishments, for everything that we do, that it ultimately is to God's glory and an expression of our thanksgiving to God for bringing it about. That's our Christian life. That's our Christian witness. And that's why Paul can be so clear to say in the one passage I read there, that the result of this is that we prove literally what is the good and acceptable will of God, and that there are people that will see this and want to come. They'll want to join. They'll want to know more. They'll want to continually know more. And again, even to the point of the day that God comes to visit us. So, the one thing that this other conclusion, just in reading these, is that the grace of God is sufficient. It is truly sufficient. And that was my takeaway from it. Our adoption is sure, and Ephesians 1:5, which is also referenced, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ to himself, according to the good pleasure of his will, to the praise of the glory of his grace, by which he has made us acceptable in the beloved. We are sufficient to do all that God asks us. Isn't that amazing? Our sufficiency doesn't come from ourselves. It comes from God. God calls us to obey. God calls us to live according to his word. God calls us to sacrifice ourselves in service to our brethren. And he enables us. And so we are sufficient in these things. And I just, as we think about those things, and we think about our life, again, we're continually brought back to thankfulness. There is a warning in question 87 regarding the fact that if somebody is continuing in sin, they're continuing to be a covetous man, a thief, an idolater. You can see the items there listed. That then we really have to question whether or not they even understand God. But what is the real issue there? They are not saved who do not turn to God from their unthankfulness. So the greatest witness we have is demonstrating thankfulness to God. And the greatest reason to call into question our faith is unthankfulness. And so again, it's an amazing concept. It's an amazing idea. We do often just fall prostrate. Just we're knocked down. We don't see even the way up. And we cry out as that sinner who beat his breast, saying, I have nothing to offer, nothing to bring. But it's in that God brings about a new life. And the expression of that new life is thankfulness to God.